Well, the worst has finally happened. I have warned you that a human being is crawling out of my wife at some point in the future. Well, the future is now the present. So this week I'm going to be off on paternity leave. So I'm leaving you a series of videos which I've recorded so that you can actually get some work done this week. But I can assure you a human being is crawling out of my wife, and that human being has already crawled out of my, well, let's not get into that.
That's nasty.
But either way, Jack is going to be having a far worse day than you are, and you can be sure of that. So, one of the primal fears of a human male is the idea of watching a baby sort of ripping its way out from somebody that you put it into. And,
that's nasty.
And yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. Not looking forward to the sort of head coming out and it looking up at me and thinking, this is the stuff of horror movies. This is the stuff of movies that I used to go and watch when I was a kid. I don't want to see this. I really don't. So this is going to be terrible.
Why is he saying that? Why is he saying that to me?
She's really looking forward to it. I think she has no idea the human body is just not designed for this at all. And,
there's blood everywhere. Holy!
And this is going to suck all around. She's having an epidural, which is, those of you that don't know, this is an injection into your spine to stop pain being sent up and down your spine to your brain. So she's going to be essentially paralysed while pumping this thing out. So this is awful. This is disgusting. Don't like this. Don't want to be involved in this. Would rather be teaching you, and that's saying something. So let's have a look. So we're going to skip ahead. I don't know where we are in the book because I'm not 100% sure when this is going to be happening, or I wasn't 100% sure when this was going to be happening. The baby, we were told it could be any time from 3 weeks ago upwards. So what we're going to do is we're going to go straight on to forensic science. So turn to page 198. We're going to have a look at the forensic science section, and then we'll do the questions, and we'll do some other related stuff this week. Nothing too backbreaking, but I just needed to leave you some work, so that's what I've done. So forensic science, page 198, 199, and we'll do the questions on 200. So forensic science, for those of you that do, well, let's have a look. For those of you that don't know, forensic science was recognised by the police force in the 1930s. Since then, it has become an invaluable tool for helping to solve crimes riddled with uncertain evidence. The following extract explains how forensic science is used in police work and some of its development. So essentially, it's basically using science to solve crimes. It's as simple as that. So we break this down. We look at chemical evidence, we look at biological evidence, we look at tiny little things and try and work out the idea of what happened on a crime scene. Some of it is incredibly impressive. I saw a video once where somebody was shot through a window, and the forensic scientists picked up every single piece of broken glass and reassembled the window so that they could work out where the bullet hole was, because then you've got the bullet impact in the wall behind the victim, so you could trace the bullet path back and work out where the shot was coming from. So to do that, they picked up every single piece of broken glass and reassembled it as a jigsaw puzzle. And that is incredible. The patience required for that is amazing. DNA evidence has obviously become a huge thing and a huge problem because it's nowhere near as reliable as people think. Your chances of being incorrectly identified as a criminal because of DNA evidence is better than your chances of winning the lottery in a Western country. So that gives you an idea just how bad DNA evidence actually is. Originally, we used to use things like fingerprints. Fingerprints were pretty reliable. In case you don't know, fingerprints started out as, well, everybody's finger is essentially unique. Not maybe entirely, but almost unique. And that started out in, as far as I know, African diamond mines, where, could have been gold mines, I think it was diamond mines, where to pay people, they took fingerprints because they couldn't tell one person from another. And it all started with this one particular guy who had a double, same name, same date of birth, and facially almost identical. And they realised, well, we can't do this. We have to have an identifying feature. So they looked into fingerprints, and that became a good way of working out who was who. So they started looking for fingerprints on crime scenes, and that would give you more evidence that someone was there. Then we started looking at blood types, but blood types, there's only 4, and it gives you some evidence. DNA is far better, but it's still not 100% reliable. These things improve with time, obviously, but there's lots of different scientific principles that we can apply to solving crimes and to trying to figure out who did what to whom and why. So forensic science proves dead men can tell tales. So let's have a look. Arthur Conan Doyle. In case, again, you don't know who that is, he was the writer that came up with Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes was the great detective from the Victorian era. And I would argue that maybe forensic science was accepted in the 1930s, but it certainly started a long time before that. People were applying science and scientific means to solving crimes hundreds of years ago. It just didn't have the sort of current polish that it has today. But people have been applying science and logic to solving crimes forever. It's just that our understanding of technology has improved. Our understanding of science has, well, it improved up to a few years ago, and then of course people forgot how to science. But yeah, so when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created his detective Sherlock Holmes, he used as a model a surgeon who dabbled in the practice of forensic science. Yet as skilled as he was in the art of observation and deduction, Holmes's talents pale beside the sophisticated techniques used by today's forensic scientists, as they put paid to the adage that dead men tell no tales. The trial of the parents of Azaria Chamberlain in Darwin, Australia, put forensic science under an international microscope as leading world scientists were called to give evidence. Their evidence proved the main argument for the prosecution's case, which alleged that Miss Alice Lynn Chamberlain killed her baby in the family car as it was parked alongside their tent at Ayers Rock on the 17th of August 1980. Wow, killed her own baby in a car? Incredibly unlikely. Does happen. In fact, when it comes to murderers, more of them are women than men, especially killing children. It tends to be that women will use less violence. Poisoning is more common for a woman. Those sort of things. Men tend to do it in the heat of passion, but women are just as dangerous. In fact, we have a saying in England, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So there's nothing as dangerous in hell as there is in a woman who's angry at you. And that's true. Witnesses giving evidence were experts in the area of blood, teeth marks and animal behaviour, soil and vegetation, and even ultraviolet photography. The court heard probably the largest amount of forensic evidence presented in Australia, despite the fact the body was never found and a motive was not established. Australia's gone a bit crazy, hasn't it? I mean, can you trying her for murder when there's no body and no motive? That's crazy. Police rely heavily on forensic scientists when the identity of a body, the cause of death or the circumstances surrounding a crime are not certain. Their examinations provide vital information which can help solve a crime, and their testimony can result in convictions when other evidence is lacking. A forensic dentist, Dr. Jerry Dalitz, has been called upon to help in several cases. He uses a technique involving the superimposition on closed-circuit television of an image of a dead person's skull onto an image of a photograph of the person suspected to have been killed. Video superimposition is one of the more recent techniques which forensic scientists use to help identify bodies. This is so out of date, this is ridiculous. It involves the use of 2 television cameras and a monitor. One camera is trained on the skull to be identified, which is held on a special apparatus enabling it to be moved in any direction. The other camera is focused on the photography of the head. The video image of the skull is superimposed on the video image of the photograph via a mixing desk. In this way, the forensic dentist is able to make an accurate comparison of the skulls with a photograph of the person in a matter of hours. I actually saw a documentary series on this when I was pretty young. And it was an IRA terrorist. So in England we had this problem with the Irish, where the Irish were treated like crap, basically, and they formed the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. The guy who started it is actually a distant cousin of mine. I'm half Irish. And they started the IRA, and we had frequent terrorist attacks. Nothing like modern times where it's just all talk. This is like they used to blow up buildings in London all the time. It was quite hardcore, and there was a lot of gun crime and all sorts of stuff. But in Ireland it was far worse. People were being murdered in the streets. And I remember this documentary series about a forensic dentist, and the dentist, they found this apple eaten by one of the terrorists. He'd taken a bite out of the apple, thrown it down, quickly grabbed his gun, did the murder, and they ran off. The only evidence was the apple. And this was before DNA, so they couldn't get any DNA off the apple. They didn't know what to do with it, so they preserved it in alcohol and water, I think. They mixed it together. They preserved this apple. And there wasn't really much evidence left, just this apple preserved. So they gave it to a forensic dentist, and he came back with a full description of what this man would look like. And they sort of said, well, this is impossible from just the impression of his teeth. But it turned out when they got the man, he was absolutely correct. Everything about the man's stance, his height, everything was predicted from the shape of his teeth. They worked out, because his teeth were pronounced at the front, he could only bite in a certain angle, gnawing at the apple instead of biting at it. He had pretty strange teeth, and that usually implied a sort of strange build. And they got him absolutely correct. So, you know, we look at something like teeth, and they're a huge marker of what you look like overall. The human body is weird like that. It's all sort of copy and paste. There's lots of different dimensions. If you hold your hands out like this, the tips of your two fingers measured out is exactly the same as your height. Exactly the same. So you're exactly as wide as you are high. If you ever want to work out holding a rifle, the distance between the grip here and the correct distance for the stock, so it goes right up and it's perfectly comfortable, is exactly the bend of your arm. It's perfect. There's lots of other dimensions of the length of your nose, the width of your eyes, and all of these things tell about your personality if you know how to read them. So the human body is basically a map showing all these physical traits as emotional traits and vice versa. We're a map, and the dentistry is a very good yardstick of that. So interesting stuff. Forensic examination can also help prove or disprove a police theory about how a person died. Dr. Dallas remembers a case in November 1979 where the body of a man, sorry, the lights are really bright in here and I can't actually read properly, when the body of a man was found propped against a fence in Coolaroo. Australians are weird, aren't they? Coolaroo. Who would call something Coolaroo? The man had been shot through the head at point blank range, and a rifle was found about 100 metres from the body. Police investigation had revealed that the man had been at a party and had left after an argument. Although his death looked like a murder, police believed he had shot himself because he had been seen leaving his home with a rifle. Dr. Dallas noticed some scratch marks around the rifle butt, and a local dog with a reputation for carrying things around in its mouth was tranquilised so that Dr. Dallas could take a plaster cast of its teeth. The scratch marks on the rifle matched the cast, and the man was found to have committed suicide. Okay, makes sense. There was a very interesting Sherlock Holmes story where a man committed suicide, but they never found the gun, so it was always presumed to be murder. He didn't want his family to know that he'd committed suicide. So the murder, he shot himself on a bridge with a piece of rope attached to the gun on a brick. So as he died, he let go, the gun fell into the water, got dragged down by the brick. There was never any gun found, and they always assumed it was a murder, but it was actually a suicide and done for the insurance to support his family. So yeah, it's an interesting idea from Arthur Conan Doyle. Forensic scientists do not deal only with bodies. They are specialists in the fields of ballistics, forgeries, arson, poison, blood bites, cuts, stains and soils. For instance, I mean, I think that's labouring a point. I think any science which can be applied to this is acceptable. I mean, anything that's scientific will work as forensic science. Forensic obviously is the analysis of dead things, dead people. So forensic science, anything where we can apply science is a forensic science, really. For instance, the forensic scientists who investigate fires can tell police exactly where a fire started and give detailed information about what was used to start it, like the grades of petrol. These scientists have to sift through the rubble after fires and take samples. Back at the laboratory, they pass steam through the samples, and what comes out is water mixed with traces of the accelerant. Dr. Ken Brown, an odontologist, who pioneered the use of video photographic superimposition technology, is working on a method of identifying saliva, often found in bite marks on victims of attacks. Other research projects include the use of high energy light to make visible those fingerprints which cannot be detected using ordinary methods, the use of satellites to detect illegal crops such as cannabis, and techniques to make voices on tape recordings more intelligible so that the speaker can be easily identified. The use of satellites to detect the use of growing illegal crops such as cannabis. That just beggars belief. I mean, this is supposed to be in Australia, a free country where people are allowed to be free, but you're not allowed to grow a herb, a naturally occurring herb, and to the point where the government will spend money on satellites to stop you doing it. That is absolutely insane. Free country. Oh, that's it, finished. This is actually really annoying because I wanted to know, did this woman kill her baby? Did she do it? Or, I mean, who knows? Because, you know, if you're applying science to that, who knows? So that's a very weak introduction. I don't think there's very much meat on these bones. I actually find this kind of more annoying than informative, because all it's done is given us the tiniest of introductions, and it's left me actually wanting to know what they're talking about. You know, I don't really get much from this. Yeah. Not really impressed, but that's this book over and over, isn't it? I mean, it never really gives you enough detail about anything. So this is an introduction to forensic science. I think what we'll do this week is we'll build on this. We'll have a look at some other unsolved crimes and how people have tried to solve crimes. One of the things I'm actually quite interested in at the moment is aircraft mysteries. So maybe we'll have a look at one of those. There was a couple of interesting ones where aeroplanes have got, one of them was very interesting, where aeroplanes have gone missing. The black box, in case you don't know, the black box is a recording device that sits in the tail of aircraft and records everything, all the flight telemetry, all the recording, everything, the captain's voice, everything is recorded in the black box. And the black box has a radio transmitter in it, and it's in the tail because that's the part that usually survives a crash. So even though everybody else is dead, the black box will tell us how and why, so that we can learn our lessons and make sure that we don't allow these mistakes to happen again. So the black box is a useful tool in solving these mysteries. And there was one of them where the aeroplane went missing and it got buried in the snow, and it was all covered up by the Bolivian government, and they sent up a investigation team, and the government tried to stop them, and eventually they found it. Never found the black box. They found where the black box was in the aircraft, and somebody had taken it out, taken it into the snow and smashed it to pieces with a hammer. So that's very, very interesting. I'd like to know more about that story, but of course there isn't much more to learn. I think it was Eastern Airlines in America, where Eastern Airlines got into a lot of trouble. They were caught smuggling drugs. Literally caught smuggling drugs, to the point where one of the pilots literally found a big case of cocaine under his chair. You know, he wasn't smuggling it, he reported it to the police. He got into his plane, his chair felt weird, and he found a big sack of cocaine hidden in the plane. So it's a pretty obvious thing what happened. Something went wrong, and they tried to cover it up. And the Bolivian government were involved in some sort of drug smuggling operation. Money was going back to the cartels. It was pretty screwed up. America runs on this kind of stuff. America's terrible for this. I heard an accusation about George Bush Sr. He used to own oil rigs, and there was no customs control with oil rigs. So normally, you know, you come in from an aeroplane, customs will search your luggage, you'll be tracked. That didn't happen with oil rigs because they're only offshore, there's no custom controls. So rumour was that they were delivering drugs by boat to the oil rigs, and the oil rigs were just bringing drugs in unchecked through George Bush's oil rigs, at the same time as he was starting the war on drugs back in the 80s. And that sounds about right for the Bush family, when you remember that George Bush's grandfather was charged with treason during World War I for funding both sides of the war. So he was involved in funding the war, making sure that there was a war. So the Bush family were involved in making sure that people were killing each other. Millions of people died so that they could make a profit. Yeah, that's what the President of the United States looks like. Didn't used to be. So maybe we'll look into stuff like that. Let me know well, obviously you can't do that this time, but let me know if you're interested in stuff like this, and we can look further into it. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at the questions.
Did you cheat?
A little bit.
Okay. So hopefully you've done the questions. Now let's have a look at your answers. Questions 1 through 9, page 200. The title of this extract is a play on the words of well-known phrase, "Dead men tell no tales." What does the title suggest? It suggests the opposite, that dead men do tell tales. I don't agree with that. They used to say that a picture will tell no lies, but it's all about interpreting the picture correctly. It's all about interpreting dead men will tell no tales. Of course you can shut a man up by killing him, but it leaves a trace. Everything you do leaves fingerprints. There's always a trace of something, no matter what you do. And it just depends on how intelligent, resourceful and patient you are about whether or not you're going to uncover the truth. So yeah, dead men tell no tales, but people who know how to listen will always be able to hear the truth. How is the new technique of superimposition used to identify bodies? Well, it's not a new technique by now. I mean, this book is probably 20 years old. So basically you have two screens and you superimpose one image on top of another. So if you would take my face, you would take my skull, and you would show the picture of my skull over the top of my face, and you'd look for matches. So you'd have a look, you'd try and get the same angle matched up. And this is not a new technique at all. Forensic photography has been around since I know of it in the 60s. So I mean, this is not new. Using, I suppose, televisions and things like that, I guess, is new, or it was new then, but it's definitely not a new technique. So what they do is they put the skull of the dead person and the photograph of the person they suspect it is, and they look for things like bones, and they see if the bone marks line up, so that we can work out, is this the same person? These days, there is a different technique now where they model using 3D printing, where we take the skull and we work out the relative thickness of muscle, and they literally build it up. So we have forensic scientists putting sticks all over it, working out the depths, and they build the face back up and try and work out what the person would have actually looked like while alive. It's not 100% reliable, it's more of a sketch, but it does point you in the right direction. If all we've got is a skull, we can usually work out to a degree what that person will look like. Obviously that doesn't take into account things like race, eye colour, hair colour, and the condition and age of the person. But it does give you a good pointer. In terms of race, for instance, I mean, you can tell from the skull what race a person is, but there might be small variations in race where we see larger nostrils, which obviously we're not going to see from a bone. You're not going to see from a bone because the bones in my nose end up about here, and then the shape of my nose down here is just cartilage, which won't survive. So we wouldn't be able to tell, do I have a long nose, do I have a flat nose? And that would be dependent on race and other characteristics. But it would be a useful guide in working out overall what this person would have looked like. And then we can work out the age of them, try and make it look, try and put the hair on them that's appropriate to their race or whatever, and try and work out, is this likely the person? So we can help to narrow it down by building a model. We do this a lot with non-critical things. You see this a lot with things like where they've found very ancient skulls of hominids or pre-humanoids, where they'll build the face back up. And it's like looking into the past. It gives us a very good idea of what people's humanoids would have looked like thousands and thousands of years ago. It's very interesting. If you look it up, it's all over Google. So look that kind of stuff up. How did Dr. Dalitz proved that a gun had been moved from the scene of the crime by a dog. The marks, teeth marks on the gun. So the gun has gone off, he shot himself in the face, killed himself. The dog has picked up the wooden stick. Dog doesn't know any difference, picked it up, and it's left teeth marks in the wood. So they tranquilised the dog, they measured its teeth, and they made a cast of its teeth and checked it. Yep, teeth match. So the dog has very likely dragged the rifle away 100 yards. So how did Dr. Dallett's discovery about the dog picking up the gun save the police from wasting a lot of time? Well, they would have looked for a murderer, and there was no murderer. He killed himself. I mean, this doesn't make an awful lot of sense, because when you fire a gun, there's a lot of carbon scoring. There's a lot of hot gases which leave a trace. So it would have made much more sense to simply swab the guy's fingers. Did he shoot himself? If he did, he's going to leave traces of carbon and gunpowder all over his fingers. If he fired the gun, that would give you a much stronger indication that yes, this is probably suicide and the gun must have moved somehow. So I would think they did that as well. And I think for the case of this story, the interesting element of the dog doing it, you know, we've got proof of that. So I think when you look at this, it's very much like human body language. We don't take human body language as a word. Every gesture is a word, sorry. We don't take it as one thing. We take it as building up a sentence. So if somebody is sitting back and crossing their arms, that's two strong gestures that you're not interested. But if they're also raising an eyebrow and leaning forward slightly, then they are interested, they're just not sure. So it's all about building up a picture from lots of different elements and lots of different pieces of evidence. So we put a picture together, and I think it's the same thing with this. We would have had to have proved he fired the gun, it was his own gun, was it loaded with more than one round of ammunition? We would look at all these different elements together, and the dog bites would also give us an idea of, well, maybe it's, because that's not proof. Teeth mark in the gun only proves that the dog moved the gun at some point. It doesn't tell us that it moved it after it was fired. It can't do that. So all we've got is the evidence that the dog bit the stock, the woodwork of the gun. So we've got that evidence. We would also need to know that he fired the gun, or he fired a gun, and we'd have to match everything up. You can also tell from the angles. If I shoot you in the head with a rifle, the angle is going to look very, very different to if you shoot yourself, obviously. I'm quite tall. If I'm shooting somebody smaller, it'll be pointing downwards slightly. There won't be there's a huge difference in muzzle blast. A point blank shot looks totally different to a shot from 10 yards out, and 100 yards even different again. So you'd be looking at all these different things. You'd be building up an image of it. Why the man's death at Coolaroo appear at first to be murder? Because there was an argument. So you got witnesses saying there was an argument, he was angry, somebody might have been angry at him, all this kind of nonsense. So it looked on the surface like there was some hostility and maybe there was a problem between the two guys. So it looked superficially like it could have been a murder. Why is the steam rather than the water used to filter the fuel which started a fire? I suppose the water could be contaminated. Steam is lighter, I suppose, so it carries it up. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. What is an accelerant? An accelerant is something that makes the fire burn faster or quicker. You've got, in explosives and anything that burns, you've got a fuel and you've got a oxidizer. If you look at gunpowder, for instance, you've got an oxidizing agent which provides oxygen, and you've got a fuel that burns. The more oxygen you give it, the faster it burns. So an accelerant does the job of doing both, adding fuel and getting it to burn hotter. So it increases the heat. The more heat, the more the heat spreads. You all know that. If I set fire to my bed, chances are I'm going to end up with a big burn mark. But if I chuck a tin of petrol over my bed and set fire to it, I could lose my house. So an accelerant makes it burn hotter, brighter, and makes it faster. What information can the forensic scientists who investigate fires give the police? Well, they can tell you what chemicals were used. If you find traces of petrol inside a house, then there's suspicion, obviously. Yeah, petrol doesn't belong in a house. If you find a shed burned down and it's full of paint and paint thinner, it's not that suspicious because people store those things in their sheds. If you find the whole house is full of petrol, then that's pretty suspicious, you know, because you're not going to store that. So it's looking for chemicals that don't fit. Whenever you're looking to solve a crime, you're looking for things that don't fit, things that stand out, things that shouldn't be there and are. How would a method of identifying saliva be useful in solving crimes? I mean, I'm a little hazy on this because identifying saliva, I mean, 20 years ago we had DNA evidence, so I'm not sure what he means by identifying saliva. Your saliva would be full of DNA, so I'm not sure how you'd want to identify it beyond that. Something even older. I mean, we've got this reference here of 1980. And that would be before DNA evidence was a thing. So I guess that this story is actually very, very old. I think it was probably 20 years old when this book was published. So yeah, it's pretty old and pretty out of date. Because these days we would just, you know, we've got a trace of saliva, we'll just check it for DNA. These days DNA is very, very cheap to test, it's very, very reliable. For $200, you can have a DNA test yourself from Australia. Australia is quite big for this. And they'll literally send you a kit, you swab the inside of your mouth, send it back to them, and they'll tell you your entire family tree, where your families come from, what percentage of this you are, what percentage of that you are. They'll give you your entire racial history right back to Neanderthal man. So it's incredibly reliable these days. I can't imagine that this was post DNA evidence, because it just doesn't make sense. So I don't think that makes an awful lot of sense. But how would a method of identifying saliva be useful in solving crimes? Well, in some cases people bite one another. I guess it's pretty unusual. You know, you're not going to get many crimes by sophisticated, intelligent murderers where they think, you know, I'm just going to kill this guy in an untraceable way, and while I'm at it, I think I might just bite his face. You know, it doesn't happen. So, if you could find a trace of saliva, maybe it would help you to identify if there was a wound. I can't imagine there would be, but it's rare. But I guess it would help. Because you've got to think that all of these things, all this DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, all of those things mean that you've got proof, or at least some evidence, that that person was there at the scene. And that's what you're trying to establish, that this person was there when the murder happened. First of all, you time the murder, and that's very unsophisticated. Normally what you'll do is have a doctor look at the body and guess how old it is from how long it's been there and how decomposed it is. It's fairly reliable because you go into rigor mortis, so your body hardens, you lock into place, and then that passes and you start to putrefy. And this is a process that takes months. So it can be worked out roughly how old a body is from looking at it, but it's difficult. Timing the body's death, and then you've got to work out how long ago he died, work out what time roughly he died. You can normally give a window of a few hours. And then you've got to establish, was that person there during that time? Fingerprint evidence, saliva evidence, DNA evidence helps to say, yeah, this guy was there, which means at least they're involved. You know. And as I say, we're trying to put together a sentence, not a word. And this is where a lot of American stuff goes wrong, because these days it's not scientific. It's not scientific at all, even though the entire principle of justice in America is based on the concept of innocent until proven guilty. But that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Even in England, you know, the very fact that we have people in prison before they have trials, we lock people up in case they do a runner, but they're innocent until proven guilty. So we have to treat them as innocent people until we can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt in front of a court of their peers that they're actually guilty. But we've ignored that. We've taken that right and that freedom away from people. But no one talks about that. But that's because in America, you look at America, one of the things they are number one in, one of them is belief in angels, another is amount of adults in prison. And the reason for that is because they privatized the prisons. People made a lot of money from prisons. So when you've got a very corrupt government who are only interested in making money for their cronies and their friends, and then you start making money from putting people in prison, the prison population will explode. And that's exactly what happened in America. We started putting more and more people in prison for less and less crimes. We got to the stage, I've been rewatching The Twilight Zone, set in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, they already had the 3 strikes and you're out policy. And that literally means that if you get caught committing 3 crimes, you go to prison. In some states, you go to prison for the rest of your life. Now, you know, you might get steal a couple of cars and then get caught throwing a cigarette on the floor. Doesn't matter. That's your 3rd crime, your 3rd strike. You're out. You go to prison for the rest of your life. And that's insane. That's insane. So, yeah, quite a dangerous place to live. Freedom in America is long gone, long gone. So, okay, I hope you found that interesting. Could have been a lot more interesting. I think we'll look into more detail on this because there's more potential than this. So we'll see. And I'll see you next time.